The screen door creaked open on a humid summer afternoon in 1953. The man on the porch wore a pressed suit despite the 90-degree heat, his hat tipped at a precise angle, and a leather sample case held firmly in his right hand. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Just a moment of your time." This was America's frontline commerce, the door-to-door salesman, an institution as familiar to mid-century America as the mailman or milkman. He brought vacuum cleaners to suburbia, encyclopedias to hungry minds, and brushes to every kitchen drawer. This is the story of the disappearance of an American archetype, the traveling salesman who once knocked on 40 million doors annually and now exists only in our collective memory and fading family stories. What happened to these men, and they were almost exclusively men, who traveled America's newly paved streets with nothing but sample cases and commission dreams? Where did they go? And what does their disappearance tell us about the America we've become? The morning routine never varied for Raymond Pritchett in the summer of 1957. Awake at 6:30 a.m., cold shower, hot coffee. Suit pressed the night before, shoes polished to military standards. By 7:45, he'd be reviewing his prospect list, while his wife Ruth prepared breakfast for their 2 children in their modest Levittown home. The Fuller Brush Company expected their representatives to project success even if they weren't yet achieving it, and Raymond took this philosophy to heart. His manager called it dressing prosperity, the belief that success came to those who already looked the part. "You never know which door holds your next big sale," Raymond told his son on those rare Saturdays when he'd bring the boy along. "But they all have to see a successful man standing on their porch when they open it." By 8:30 a.m., he'd be on the road, working through methodically plotted territories, making between 30 and 40 cold calls per day. Fuller Brush representatives averaged 1 sale for every 5 doors, a 20% success rate that was considered industry standard. In 1957, the company fielded over 7,000 salesmen nationwide, collectively knocking on approximately 40,000 doors per hour across America. The door-to-door sales industry employed over 1.5 million Americans at its peak in the late 1950s, more workers than the entire U.S. auto industry. Companies like Avon, Encyclopedia Britannica, Kirby Vacuum Cleaners, and Fuller Brush dominated this direct sales approach, but there were hundreds of smaller players selling everything from insurance policies to aluminum siding. In 1959, direct home sales accounted for almost $8.5 billion annually, about $79 billion in today's dollars. The origins of door-to-door selling in America stretch back to colonial times, when peddlers carried their wares in sacks and trunks across rural communities. These early salesmen brought goods from cities to isolated homesteads, establishing essential commerce networks in sparsely populated areas. But it was the Industrial Revolution and mass production that truly created the golden age of direct selling. Alfred C. Fuller founded what would become an American institution in 1906, starting with just $375 in borrowed capital. A Nova Scotia farm boy with little education, Fuller began making brushes by hand in his sister's basement in Boston, then selling them door to door. His philosophy was simple: make it work, make it last. Guarantee it no matter what. By 1922, the company's sales had reached $1 million annually, about $16 million in today's dollars. Fuller wasn't just selling brushes. He was pioneering a new approach to sales psychology. He developed an early form of customer relationship management, instructing salesmen to keep detailed note cards on each household, noting children's names, pet breeds, and buying preferences. "A good salesman is a man who finds out what a customer wants," Fuller often said, and helps them get it. This combination of personalized service, quality products, and persistent follow-up created what business historians would later identify as America's first modern sales force. The Fuller Brush Man soon became immortalized in popular culture. Red Skelton starred in The Fuller Brush Man, 1948, while Lucille Ball appeared in The Fuller Brush Girl, 1950. Their iconic sample cases and well-rehearsed pitches became as recognizable as any brand in America. At the industry's height, Fuller representatives were knocking on 20 million American doors annually, and more than 8,000 different salesmen walked American neighborhoods in 1948 alone. What's often overlooked in contemporary accounts is that door-to-door sales represented one of the few meritocratic opportunities in mid-century America. While discrimination certainly existed within companies, the pay structure based purely on commission meant that effective salespeople could earn substantial incomes regardless of their background. In 1955, top Fuller brush salesmen earned upwards of $20,000 annually, equivalent to about $204,000 today, at a time when the average American household earned approximately $4,400. For many immigrants, the door-to-door sales profession offered an entry point into American economic life without requiring advanced education or language skills. Companies like Avon specifically targeted immigrant communities for recruitment, knowing that these salespeople could effectively penetrate ethnic neighborhoods where outsiders might be unwelcome. By 1960, more than 18% of direct sales representatives came from first- or second-generation immigrant backgrounds. The formula worked because it solved a real problem for both sides of the transaction. For customers, especially women who managed households but often lacked transportation to shopping centers, the salesman brought the store to their doorstep. For companies, direct sales eliminated expensive retail overhead and built personal brand loyalty through repeated household visits. The demonstration element, showing rather than telling, proved particularly effective for new and innovative products. Richard Osborne began selling Kirby vacuum cleaners in 1951 after returning from Korea. The beauty was in the demonstration, he recalled in a 1998 interview for the National Direct Selling Association's Oral History Project. You dump dirt on their carpet, then show them how much the Kirby picked up compared to their current vacuum. It wasn't a hard sell, it was a show. People bought because they saw the difference with their own eyes. Kirby's sales approach was meticulous, requiring representatives to follow a 16-step demonstration that typically lasted 90 minutes. The company reported an average of $129,000 in vacuum cleaner sales per day in 1957. Individual units sold for $69.50, approximately $670 in today's currency, and top salesmen could earn commissions of $200 $300 weekly, $2,000 $3,000 in modern terms. The life wasn't easy. Most door-to-door salesmen faced rejection dozens of times daily. They worked purely on commission with no benefits, no retirement plans, and no job security. Companies tracked performance religiously. Representatives falling below sales quotas would quickly find themselves without territories. The work required physical stamina, psychological resilience, and unwavering optimism. You had to believe in what you were selling, explained former Encyclopedia Britannica salesman Harold Weiler in a 1982 interview. Those books were expensive, $300 for the full set, when people were making maybe $100 a week. But I honestly believed every family needed them. I sold the future of their children, not just books. Encyclopedia sales represent a particularly fascinating chapter in door-to-door selling history. At their peak in 1970, Encyclopedia Britannica employed over 2,000 door-to-door representatives in America alone. The company's sales approach targeted parental aspirations, emphasizing educational advantages and opportunities for advancement. A complete set cost between $300 $500 in the 1960s, approximately $2,700 for $500 today, and could be purchased on installment plans, typically $10 down and $10 monthly for 4 years. The carefully choreographed sales presentation began with seemingly casual questions about children's ages and educational interests before transitioning into a rehearsed demonstration highlighting the encyclopedia's depth and accessibility. Company records show that the average salesperson made $12,000 annually in 1965, about $104,000 today, with top performers earning more than $50,000. Then something changed, slowly at first, then with accelerating speed. October 12, 1966, a seemingly ordinary Wednesday in Levittown, Pennsylvania. Raymond Pritchett, now a regional sales manager for Fuller Brush, noticed something unusual in his sales reports. Door-to-door representatives were reporting more, not at-home designations, than at any previous point in company history. Internal surveys revealed that approximately 38% of daytime door knocks now went unanswered, up from just 17% a decade earlier. The change wasn't random. America itself was transforming. Women, the primary targets for daytime door-to-door sales calls, were entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Between 1950 and 1970, female employment increased by 40%, with married women accounting for much of this growth. The suburban home, once reliably occupied during business hours, was increasingly empty when salesmen came calling. Simultaneously, American shopping habits were undergoing revolutionary change. The first fully enclosed climate-controlled shopping mall opened in Edina, Minnesota in 1956. By 1970, more than 1,500 malls dotted the American landscape. Retail was consolidating and centralizing, drawing consumers away from neighborhood commerce and into massive commercial centers. The changing nature of suburban life brought additional challenges. New planned communities increasingly incorporated design elements that discouraged door-to-door solicitation, gated entrances, apartment buildings with security doors, and neighborhoods with complex, winding streets that made systematic canvassing difficult. In 1965, the Supreme Court case Breard v. Alexandria upheld the constitutionality of local ordinances restricting door-to-door commercial solicitation, giving communities legal tools to limit salesmen's access. Consumer attitudes were shifting too. The post-war optimism that had greeted salesmen with open doors was giving way to increasing skepticism. High-profile scandals involving fraudulent sales practices created public wariness. A 1968 Federal Trade Commission investigation found widespread deceptive practices in encyclopedia sales, including falsely claiming sales were educational interviews and misrepresenting total costs. The growing consumer protection movement, championed by figures like Ralph Nader, cast a shadow over direct selling techniques that had once seemed standard practice. But there was something else too, something harder to define in economic terms. Many former salespeople describe a feeling that began around 1970, a subtle change in how they were received at doorways. The welcome grew cooler, doors opened more reluctantly, trust had begun to erode. People stopped inviting you in, recalled William Harrison, who sold Cutco knives from 1958 to 1976. In the early days, they'd offer coffee, ask you to sit down. By the 70s, they kept you on the porch. By the 80s, they barely opened the door. This erosion of trust wasn't limited to salespeople. It reflected broader social transformations. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, the Vietnam War, and the Watergate scandal all contributed to a general decline in social trust. Gallup polling shows American trust in institutions and strangers dropped precipitously between 1964 and 1974. The door-to-door salesman, once welcomed as a community figure bringing news and goods from beyond, increasingly represented an intrusion, even a potential threat. By 1980, the Fuller Brush sales force had declined from 8,000 representatives to fewer than 3,000. Encyclopedia Britannica's door-to-door operations were operating at 40% of their 1970 peak. Avon, which had built its empire on the Avon calling door-to-door model, began shifting toward party plan selling and catalog distribution. Technology delivered additional blows. The rise of telemarketing in the 1970s provided companies with cheaper alternatives to maintain direct consumer contact. The advent of cable television in the late 1970s and early 1980s enabled new forms of direct response marketing. The cost per contact was dramatically lower. A television commercial could reach thousands of households for the same cost as a few dozen door-to-door visits. The economics were becoming increasingly untenable. Door-to-door selling relied on a simple calculation. If a salesperson visited enough homes and maintained a consistent conversion rate, the commissions would justify the effort. But as not-home rates increased, neighborhoods became more difficult to navigate, and consumer resistance grew. That equation changed dramatically. Companies found that acquiring customers through direct mail, telemarketing, and television advertising often cost one-third to one-half of door-to-door acquisition costs. Some companies tried to adapt. In 1987, Encyclopedia Britannica launched a CD-ROM version of its reference works. Fuller Brush expanded into catalog sales. Avon representatives began distributing brochures rather than carrying inventory, but these efforts often came too late or represented fundamental shifts away from the door-to-door model. There's an almost haunting quality to how quickly this American institution faded. By 1990, true door-to-door sales had declined by more than 80% from their 1950s peak. When Encyclopedia Britannica officially ended its door-to-door sales program in 1996, it made national headlines, not because the practice was still widespread, but because it represented the final collapse of a once ubiquitous American experience. The statistics tell one story, but former salespeople tell another, one filled with both nostalgia and nuanced understanding of what was lost. Many describe a profession that built character through rejection and resilience. Others recall the genuine relationships formed with customers over years of regular visits. "I knew their children's names, when they got married, when they had babies of their own," said Ruth Overbeck, an Avon representative from 1949 to 1983. "I was part of their lives. We weren't just selling lipstick, we were bringing a little bit of connection and care." The door-to-door salesman's decline coincided with other changes in American community life. Robert Putnam's influential study, Bowling Alone, documented the deterioration of American social connections beginning in the 1970s, fewer dinner parties, declining civic organization memberships, and reduced informal socializing between neighbors. The salesman at the door had been, however briefly, a moment of human connection in increasingly isolated suburban landscapes. This nostalgia, however, often overlooks the more problematic aspects of the profession. Many sales techniques relied on psychological manipulation. Training manuals explicitly taught methods to generate artificial scarcity, create social pressure, and exploit parental anxieties. High-pressure tactics were common, particularly in big-ticket sales like encyclopedia sets or vacuum cleaners. And yet, even accounting for these concerns, something authentic was lost. The door-to-door salesman represented a distinctly American combination of entrepreneurial spirit, personal connection, and optimistic persistence. Their disappearance paralleled other shifts in American economic life, toward more mediated experiences, less direct human interaction, and increasingly corporatized consumption patterns. What remains today? Scattered legacy operations and transformed business models. Fuller Brush filed for bankruptcy in 2012, though the brand continues under new ownership primarily as an online retailer. Encyclopedia Britannica ceased printing physical volumes in 2012 after 244 years of continuous publication. Avon, once the standard-bearer of door-to-door selling, was acquired by Brazilian company Natura in 2020 after years of declining North American sales. A few door-to-door operations persist in specialized niches. Security system sales, some home improvement services, and certain educational materials still utilize modified direct selling approaches. Religious groups like Jehovah's Witnesses continue door-to-door ministry, but the professional full-time door-to-door salesperson has largely vanished from American life. The physical artifacts of this era are increasingly valuable to collectors. Vintage Fuller Brush sample cases can sell for hundreds of dollars. Complete encyclopedia sets from the 1960s, once found in donation bins, now appear in curated vintage shops. The material culture of door-to-door selling, from order books to sample kits, has transformed from everyday commercial tools to nostalgic Americana. In certain abandoned Midwest office buildings, where companies like Southwestern Advantage, formerly Southwestern Company, once trained thousands of college students for summer sales programs, strange phenomena have been reported. Security guards describe hearing phantom knocks and doorbells in empty hallways. Maintenance workers report finding sample cases that seem to move between visits. Former salespeople sometimes claim they can feel the weight of their old cases on particularly humid days, phantom limb sensations from careers long ended. While these stories likely represent nothing more than the natural melancholy that accompanies institutional decline, they speak to how deeply this profession once embedded itself in American life. There's a particular irony that while traditional door-to-door selling has virtually disappeared, its spiritual successor, social media direct selling, has exploded. Today's multi-level marketing companies utilize the same psychological principles and relationship leverage that Fuller Brush pioneered, just transferred to digital doorways. The Facebook message from a high school acquaintance selling essential oils isn't so different from the Fuller Brush man's knock. Both rely on social connection to enable commercial transaction. So what happened to the door-to-door salesman? The explanation isn't simple. Some economists point to efficiency. Digital marketing simply reaches more potential customers at lower cost. Sociologists emphasize changing household patterns. Two-income families left no one home to answer the door. Historians note the cyclical nature of retail innovations. Door-to-door selling itself had displaced earlier commercial patterns. Cultural critics connect the salesman's decline to broader erosion of community trust and social capital. Others suggest something more mysterious. In Riverdale, Connecticut, former Kirby salesman Martin Reynolds claims the profession was cursed by its own success. "We sold convenience, then became inconvenient ourselves," he told a local newspaper in 2018. "We taught America to shop easily, then became the hard way to shop." Former Fuller Brush District Manager Thomas Klein offers a different perspective. "People don't want human connection with their commerce anymore," he observed in a 2015 documentary. "They want transactions without the relationship. We were selling both the brush and the conversation. Now they just want the brush, delivered without having to talk to anyone." At the Salesmen's Hall of Fame in Midland, Michigan, a small museum operated by former direct sales professionals, visitors can see preserved sample cases, training manuals, and commission ledgers from the industry's height. The guest book contains repeated variations of the same sentiment. "My father-grandfather sold product for 30 years. I never understood what his life was like until today." What seems clear is that the door-to-door salesman's disappearance represents more than just changing business models. It signifies a transition in how Americans relate to commerce, community, and each other. The willingness to open doors to strangers, to welcome commercial transactions into private spaces, to blend social and economic relationships. These were cultural practices that evolved alongside the profession and declined with it. The last Fuller Brush man to maintain a purely door-to-door territory was reportedly Robert Nicholson of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who retired in 2012 after 40 years with the company. His customers, many elderly, had standing monthly orders that dated back decades. When interviewed about his retirement, Nicholson expressed concern for his long-term clients. "Who's going to check on Mrs. Wilson now?" he asked. "I've been stopping by her house once a month since 1974. I knew when something was wrong by which lights were on." That blend of commerce and community care represents what was perhaps most valuable and most irreplaceable about the door-to-door selling tradition. In an increasingly algorithmic commercial landscape, where data predicts our needs and delivers solutions without human intervention, the salesman at the door seems not just outdated, but almost otherworldly, a commercial approach from an alternate America where strangers still spoke face to face. In the basement of the Business History Archives at Harvard University, researchers can access the complete sales records of multiple door-to-door operations. Among the Encyclopedia Britannica collection is a weather-beaten prospect book from a Michigan salesman active from 1965-1972. The final entry, dated March 17, 1972, reads simply, "No one home. Tried 3x America changing. Perhaps we're becoming obsolete." The salesman wasn't wrong. By then, the profession was already fading into memory, becoming the stuff of nostalgic anecdotes and cultural references. The world that had made door-to-door selling not just viable but essential was disappearing, replaced by shopping malls, catalog selling, telemarketing, and eventually e-commerce. Yet something of the salesman's spirit persists. The same optimistic persistence, the belief in personal connection, the faith that the next door might yield opportunity, these qualities continue to animate American entrepreneurship in new forms. Today's startup founder pitching venture capitalists isn't so different from the Fuller Brush man climbing porch steps with a sample case and a rehearsed presentation. Some industry veterans insist the decline wasn't inevitable. They point to countries like Japan, where direct selling remains more culturally accepted and economically viable. Others suggest that American direct selling companies failed to innovate quickly enough, clinging to traditional practices while consumer expectations evolved. Perhaps with different adaptations, technology integration, appointment-based models, or service-oriented approaches, the door-to-door tradition might have evolved rather than collapsed. What's undeniable is the profession's imprint on American culture. From Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman to the traveling salesman jokes that were once a comedy staple, the door-to-door representative permeated American consciousness. The persistent optimism, the daily rejection, the commission dreams, these became metaphors for American economic life itself. So whatever happened to door-to-door salesmen, the answer depends on whom you ask. Economists will tell you about efficiency and market evolution. Sociologists will describe changing household patterns and eroding social trust. Cultural historians will connect their decline to broader shifts in American community life. Perhaps they're all correct, or perhaps there's something more elusive at work, something about American restlessness, our cyclical embracing and rejection of commercial innovations, our complicated relationship with strangers at the door. The next time your doorbell rings unexpectedly, consider how rare that experience has become. The spontaneous commercial encounter at the threshold between public and private space, once a daily occurrence in American life, now feels almost anachronistic, a visit from another era. Whether that represents progress or loss remains, like the salesman himself, at the threshold of our collective memory, neither fully embraced nor entirely forgotten. The sample case sits in the attic, leather cracked, brass clasps tarnished. Inside, the product demonstrations have long since dried out or broken down. But if you listen closely on quiet summer evenings, you might still hear the echo of those confident footsteps climbing porch stairs and the friendly, practiced opening line. "Good afternoon. I wonder if I might have just a moment of your time."